reaching where people are at, where we were in the past. And there's often an element of, I turn around and I go, can I give a hand up to someone else now that I've learnt this part? So tell us a little bit about, how did you get to be in the place and space that you're at now?
Yeah, well, I think firstly, I just want to say I'm still getting to be in the place and space that I'm at. Like, if there's one thing that I've learned, is leadership is just a journey that continues. And, as I evolve, I have to learn myself again. And, I often say now, it's like the minute where we think we know we are who we are, we often get trapped by an identity. So the real act of leadership is being in the game of learning, like constantly, like allowing yourself to reveal yourself to yourself. Like, and I know that sounds like a bit of a, like, oh, but I started in the military, so I was very much told, like this, do that, and it was very much I had to be the good girl. I had to get it right. And so for me, I was a very outspoken young child. I'd been through a lot in my childhood. So, the one thing that my mum did actually teach me through all the trauma, through everything, was speak your truth. And so I then went into a military role, which shut that down. And it was it was interesting because I ended up getting out of the military within 2 years because of a back injury that forced me into MedCat 4. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's unfit for duty, essentially. And so through that, I had to literally figure out, well, who am I now? What does that look like? What does that get to be in life? And at first, I had followed my ex-fiance at the time in his career, but I went into this deep downward spiral of depression, and everything just felt like it was falling away. But eventually I left him and discovered that I actually really wanted to be a personal trainer. That was the reason why I joined the military in the first place. And I was like, well, if I can't do it in the military, I get to do it in my own accord. And AJ, that was the business that you really helped me build up to a level where it was like doing really well. And then you helped me turn it into a coaching business, right? So it was one of those journeys where, like, as long as I listened to what was really alive for me, I started finding out what actually was needed and where I was actually being like called to. However, when I was not, I was shutting myself down, and I was shutting down what was actually here for me in this space. And so what I later learned was that most of my life I had operated from escape leadership. Okay. And what I mean by that is, like, I don't want to be the big front runner, because if I'm forward, then I might step on someone's toes. I might say the wrong thing. People won't be happy. And I remember a lot of my life, people would be like, "Why don't you just get a real job?" Like, especially when I was a personal trainer, "Why don't you just get a real job?" And I was like, "No, like, this is a real job. This is what I love doing." And it took a really long time for me to land in, I'm just trying to do it, because the escape leadership then moved into egoic leadership, which was like, I'm trying to prove, I'm trying to be the person that has got all of the things sorted, and I don't need anyone. And I pushed men away, I pushed family away, I pushed everyone away. And it became this real journey of, like, I'm just here to prove myself now. And, the reason why I talk about embodiment now is because in order to become embodied, I had to figure out what all that was in my body. Like, it was all the stuff I'd suppressed, all the trauma, all the everything. And so my journey actually really started, it was around the time I started with you, when I was like, hold on, business isn't going the way that I want it to go. What's really going on here? And our dive wasn't, it was about business, but it had nothing to do with business, right? Like, as you know, and it was a real deep dive into me. And at the time, I was attracting unavailable men that were like, scenarios and situations that were not desirable. And I kept leaning in this space of going, like, well, I just have to prove, like, I've just got to get it right. And, no man's going to meet my needs, or whatever it was. And so I kept circling in this thing. And so what I actually realized was the efficient leadership was now stepping into place to try and, like, get it all done really quickly so I could prove that I was, successful.
Clever, good.
Yeah, and the efficient and egoic leadership, they were just like working so well together. And I remember, I can't remember like what point this was, but I remember sitting there in my personal training business, and I was like, I was reviewing you know how Tony Robbins talks about the top 6 needs. So we've got certainty, uncertainty, and all those things. Anyway, I'm reviewing them, and this one question was like, if you were to look at the top 2 needs of your business that you've been operating from, what are they? And I realized that in that moment, I had this belief that if I had a 6-pack and I was fit, people would hire me. So I had been operating from significance and from certainty, but neither of them were in a way where it was positive or serving. And so what I actually did was I flipped, and I was like, okay, if I'm going to build a powerful business, I get to operate from a place that is A, welcoming people in because they need to feel that, and B, where I'm willing to learn. So I had to put love and connection and growth as the top 2 needs of my business. And what that actually did was spark engaging leadership for me. And so as you'll notice, I'm sort of moving up a ladder here, right? Like, and engaging leadership is where we start to inspire and we start to bring others in on the journey, and we start to naturally move with what we're creating. And so because I was no longer operating from a like this, do that mentality, which I had learned in the military, I started actually connecting with people. And I started actually realizing that behind every face is a human, and behind everything that we do, there is someone that is desiring something from you if they're in your space at that time. And it's who are we being for them in that moment. And so it was a real deep look into myself, and it has been ever since, because from there it was like, okay, I could be the person who engages people, but then I could drop them if I wanted to. Then I could not be there, but they're inspired by me, but how do I hold them when they're inspired? And that's when the empowering leadership came in. It's like, okay, if I'm going to be a stand here, I get to actually be a real stand for these people to win as well, not just to be inspired by me, but also inspired by themselves. And so that's where it started, like, you know, the encouragement of like letting others see their own leadership. And I say now, like, a rising tide rises all boats. And so it's like, how do we hold that? And when we get to a level of really solidifying that for ourselves, that's when we move into embodied leadership. And embodied leadership isn't like, I'm perfect, I've got it all figured out. It's like, it is, I'm honest and I'm really real with where I'm at, and I see the greatness in you and I see the greatness in myself. And, you know, choosing to come from that is often a game, because our ego often comes in and it plays. And I know it has for me over the years, right? Like, so even with the decisions now of moving to America and, you know, literally letting go of my life in Australia and all those things, I've had so many moments of escape leadership pop up. I've had so many moments of egoic leadership pop up where it's like, try to control, try to stay on. And it's like, how do I do the thing and catch myself in it without making it even worse by shaming myself in it? Because embodied leadership isn't like you were doing egoic leadership over there and you're not good when you're over there. It's like seeing it and going, oh, okay, cool. What did I learn? And let me move back into embodied. Because when we shame ourselves, we deepen the cycle. We create more of the cycle. So my journey of understanding leadership was really through my own business development and through like who I needed to be for the people that are in my world. And it's just progressed over time, like more and more and more and more.
It's so incredible. And I love how you've packaged and articulated it now. And I know that doesn't happen in the beginning. That's kind of on a reflection back that you start to see the whole picture. And I love that in embodied leadership, it is that real honest truth about, even here are my warts and all, here are some of my soft underbelly, and that a true leader, when they're in that steward place, can really actually be honest and open about that stuff without it feeling like a weakness or a fear-based thing. But I can just be completely honest. And I know that you love Scale of Consciousness by David Hawkins like I do, and I can see how your leadership levels reflect.
It actually does line up.
Yeah, that it lines up with our level of consciousness, and really the challenges that we meet at each level of our development really reflect the words that you've used around engaging and efficient and all of those. I think the challenge is that we still often judge as dear little humans. We're judgy people. And that in hearing the levels of leadership, knowing that they're kind of a spectrum, that it's not like one's better than the other or one's ahead of the other. And for me, hearing the embodied description is around consciousness, and the more conscious we are, actually the more it's the impetus is on us to be able to bring our language to a level and meet others where they're at in order to communicate well, and not to sit on a pedestal and go, I've made it, and so therefore everyone else has to rise up, you know.
Yeah, I remember when I was first like taught this way of looking at leadership, I really thought it was linear. Like I was like, I'm going to get to embodiment and then it's going to be perfect and I'm going to have to stress. And it's like the whole enlightenment thing, right? Like everyone aims for enlightenment on the scale of consciousness. And it's like you could have something happen tomorrow that takes you straight back down. Like we are, as you say, full spectrum, like, and we're a human have like but essentially we're a spiritual being having a human experience. And so I like to look at it like, you know, I have this deep belief that we are all here to experience desire, and desire can only come with contraction. So that's going to have moments where you're not performing your best, or something happens where you're like in this space, because in order to birth something better, you have to experience something you don't desire. And so it's that space of like really, really playing with the energy of like, okay, right now I've just experienced something I don't want, but now I'm going to move into something that I do want and choose again. And the one thing that's really been huge for me over this last year, I've been doing a lot of network spinal chiropractic care with one of my doctors. And in that, so much has happened, like in my life, right? Like I've lost like 20 kilos. I've like had like so much that has shifted. But the one thing that I've really been taught that has tied so much of everything that I already know in is how our spine emits a wave, right? And so we are frequency beings. We always have a frequency that moves through us, but our spine emits that wave. And every time we are like the base of our spine, every time we're choosing something or we're aiming for something, whatever our frequency is will determine how quickly that comes in or not, right? And so you can choose the frequency of that wave by like actively being conscious in how you're showing up. And you know, a lot of the times our wave has unconscious patterns in it that we're not aware of, but the cleaner you get in your own leadership and the more awareness you bring in and the quicker you catch it, the better it is for you to start attracting and bringing in what you want in your life. And like, you know, I love the word manifest, but I don't like how the world has portrayed it to be. I'm just going to say I want this thing and suddenly it's going to come into me. There's an element of like, well, are you clean enough to receive that? You know, and I'm not saying that you have to get it all right and be perfect, but energetically, if you've got things in the way of that and you're acting from escape leadership in your personal relationship, but you're embodied at work, there's an energetic dissonance that doesn't allow it to fully land the way that you want it to land. So embodied leadership isn't necessarily like at work I'm really good and then at home I'm a bag of, you know, whatever you want to call it. But it's like, who am I being in all spaces? Because they're all connected and nothing is separate.
Absolutely. And I think that's what I love about it, is that we are on that spectrum. And so in relationships, we might be in embodied, but in finances, we might be in egoic, or in the escape one that you talked about. And so all the different aspects, we're going to be in different places, and that's going to change day by day and with events and things that go on. And also, I think what you're saying, the more we get more conscious, the more as a leader goes within and does the deep inner work, whether that's intellectually, thought-wise, whether that's spiritually through spiritual practices that help clean and clear you up, or whether that's through somatic work and body work like you're talking about with your spinal chiropractic. The more we remove that, the more it starts to raise all of the levels, and the holistic part of us starts to hold that energy, I guess, in a better way. I'm curious about how you've seen it work with people who actually lead teams, or I know you run workshops with groups of people and all those sorts of things, because most of our listeners, right, are leaders in some way, shape, or form. They're leaders of a tribe, they're leaders of an actual work team, they're leaders in their lives. How do you see this supporting them and the work that they do on themselves? How does that impact their team?
Yeah, look, I've worked with some really high level corporate, like, head of the ambulance departments and things like that in Australia. And like, I've had some really high level clients who are doing big things with their teams. And the one thing that I've actually seen is it didn't just affect their workplace. They became a better boss because they were approachable. They're available for their clients, like their staff, to be vulnerable with them, like, which is really huge, because if you're operating from egoic leadership, it's like, no, just do your job. I don't have any time for your emotional, stuff. And whereas they became more of a family unit is what I see with teams, and the sick days reduced. Like, the actual culture of the place completely shifts. But the biggest thing that I seen was their relationships change at home. So one particular client of mine, I'll never forget this. His wife actually started working with me because she just loved my work. And then he noticed a shift in her, and he had a very high level executive job that was doing very, very big things in corporate government. And anyway, so he came in and was like, I'm going to work with you. And their entire relationship was almost on the brink of separation. But when he was able to just come back in and hold space for her and actually be available, because he cleaned up his own stuff, because it was all his own inner child wounds and all the things that were getting in the way, their relationship was able to just be incredible, and really come back. And I'll share this now. But recently I've had my dad actually walk through one of the workshops that we do. And that was really big for me, because he's been an alcoholic my entire life. He runs a big company, and at night was, drinking. And he hasn't had a single drink for 6 weeks, which has been incredibly massive. Yeah. So it's been, there's been lots, you see the small things that have huge effects. And I'll have clients who, I'll work with them 1 year, and then 2 years later, they'll come back and they'll be like, oh my God, I didn't realize how big that bit was that you said. And now it's landing. And it's because it's not about oh, you might work with someone for 3 months or a short period of time, but it's the ongoing, how do you implement it and apply it in your life? And that's what I'm really, really big on, is I don't play for short term with anything that I do now. It's, and I can't remember how long ago this was, but it was years ago. But I worked with someone, and they said to me, I really want you to write your I forget the name of it right now, it's left my brain, but what they speak about at your funeral.
Oh yes, yeah. Your obituary. What they're going to say at the actual funeral. Yeah, my mum wrote her own eulogy. Sorry,
eulogy. That's it.
Yeah,
that's huge that she wrote her own. But yeah, she got us to all write it, that were in the group program with her. And I was like, at first I was like, oh, I'm not gonna really, it's not a big deal, I won't bother about it. But she's like, I really want you to think about how you want to be remembered, who you want to be remembered as. And when I wrote it out, it was before I had my son. I was pregnant with him at the time. And everything that I thought I was working for changed after that moment, because it was like, yeah, sure, I want money. Yeah, sure, I want this. Yeah, sure, I want that. But what I was writing about was, how do I want people to feel around me? How do I want people to be impacted by who I am? Whether it's one person, whether it's 100 people, it doesn't matter. It's all the same, because they're all human. And so the way I work really shifted after that moment, because I actually got to take a look at who do I want to be in the world? And I think not a lot of people sit with that question. Even we shared just before, my dad is currently in hospital with something. And I often think when someone's being quite rude or quite abrasive, it's my thought isn't, oh, you're whatever, it used to be. And that's the judgmental piece that you're talking about, right? Because when we're prejudiced naturally for safety, right? So we have this thing inside of us that when something doesn't feel unsafe, we put a protection up and we go, okay, cool, no, not today. Whereas now my prejudice is a little bit different. It's a bit more outspoken in a way of who hurt you? Dear little human, it's you can see that their nervous system isn't available. You can see that there's not something there that is easy for them to grasp, that there is another human in front of them right now. And so when I see that, I just go, okay, they're in protection right now. I'm not actually dealing with the person, I'm dealing with their wall. And so that also is just that embodied leadership of seeing like, okay, cool, there's something that I'm not seeing here, and that's okay. But I also get to say what I need in the moment as well. And so it's just an involvement of that.
And what I love about this, and I think comes back to what I've seen, and I know for sure in leadership, is that as leaders, probably in that egoic phase, we often take on that I'm responsible for everything as well. And I'm responsible for my team, and I need to do stuff to people and with people to make stuff happen. And when you really drop back, what you're talking about there is that there is a universal force, whether you call it God, spirituality, universe, Biami, whatever your faith or knowing is that there is actually an almighty force, and that we're just part of that. And so when as leaders we think we need to take that on board, it's kind of like, how dare you think that you can control stuff, when in actual fact what it tells us is we're part of a fabric of something so far greater than just who we are. And that in those situations, like you're saying, with maybe an employee or someone being rude or saying something that might offend, is realizing actually not just dear little human, but dear little me, because in actual fact what they're doing is me doing that as well. And so if we want to fix the system, we have to just fix ourselves. We can't blame others, because that is you as well, because we're all deeply, deeply connected. And I think what's missing a lot in leadership and an understanding is that we are not separate. There is no separation. Like, consciousness is all of us. And so understanding leadership and beginning to go, and what I'm hearing in your embodied matches what I would call steward eldership, or the fact that we're building an ecosystem. And in order for an ecosystem to thrive, we must thrive. And so it's not selfish to go, who am I as a leader? What do I want to become? I love doing the reflective eulogy. And one of my coaches, Taylor Welsh, he writes his eulogy every single year, right?
Wow,
every single year. And he, same thing, looks at his kids and goes, who do I want to be? And it's when my kids are going, Dad didn't come out to play again because he was working, that he realizes, okay, I've got my priorities wrong. And in all of that, what I see is research, and I'm specifically thinking of some research from human synergistics. It proves that an organization can only ever go as wide, and a culture and a high performance team can only go as high as the leader has gone deep. And they actually have proof of the level of consciousness of the executive level, C-suite, CEO, board. The level they're at is as high as the organization can go. So if you want to do better and you want your organization to grow further, it's actually just up to us as leaders to do the work on ourselves, not do stuff to other people, but just to turn it inward and do it on ourselves.
It's interesting you say that. I always use the analogy of like a tree can only grow as tall as its roots grow deep.
Correct. Yes.
You know, and when we think about the wave, like how I was talking about the wave before, it's like when we talk about being frequency beings, we can only match the wave that we're currently on. So like everything in the world becomes a mirror. And I remember I had this one coach and she was like, I don't believe that how you do everything is how you do anything, and the mirror effect. I just don't believe in it. And I was like, in that moment, I was just like, okay, like that's your belief. And what I know to be true is all of it is available, right? Because it might be like, I might butter a piece of bread differently to how I do you know, a sales landing page, for example, in my business. However, the energy I give it is going to be the same, right? The intention behind it, the way I apply myself in doing it, the presence I give it, they're all going to be the same. And so it's like, when we're not consciously looking at how is my world reflecting back to me right now, right? Like, for example, I had a little tiff with my partner this morning, right? And I'm like sitting there, like, as I'm talking now, I'm like, oh, so funny how it lands when we're like in the process of being like, okay, cool. Like in that moment, I wasn't in embodied leadership, And that's okay. I can own that. But I'm also aware of like where it comes out, where it comes in, and how to close the gap. Because a lot of people, like when you catch it, it's like, how do you shift the paradigm for it? How do you, once you've caught something that's not okay, how do you then go, okay, cool, let me clean this up for myself? And that might be, okay, I get to go and have a clearing conversation with that person that didn't feel clean with me. Or it might be, okay, cool, I get to go and journal on what was coming up for me in that moment to be so activated or whatever. But like a lot of people aren't aware of the tools and the processes that it takes to actually stand in embodied leadership, because it is all a reflection of you. And, you know, when you say about the CEOs, like the company can only grow to the level at which the CEO is, I find that so incredibly true. In the last year, I've built my business out to have like 6 staff under me. And it's like every time I have an up level, someone new comes into my team. Like it's really crazy. Like every time something happens, it's like, oh yeah, cool, you know. So it's cool just seeing how it unfolds and how it unravels, like when you actually choose yourself first.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I love that you just started to give some practical tips. And I really appreciate delving into that a bit more for our audience, as far as when I realize that I'm maybe out of my alignment, my embodied leadership. And I always say it's when you realize you're in the river and suddenly you've come up against a rock or a boulder and no longer is the water flowing. Like, to me, it's like things should be easy. I'm not saying they don't require effort, but they should still flow. And it's when the flow stops and I'm out of that, that you have to go, okay, that's feedback. What's happening? You know, is it me out of integrity? Am I in the wrong place? All those, you know, am I missing a piece? You said journal about it, maybe go and have a conversation to get clean. What are some of the other tools, I guess, that you're talking about that could help people at least identify, when am I out of that integrity and how do I get back into it? Because I would say the majority of the people are already at a certain frequency above 200 that listen to this. So they're not necessarily stuck in fear or in their ego. They're really keen to grow and develop, and they're willing, but they may not know yet, what do I do next?
Yeah, so for me, I'm huge on somatic practices, as you shared before. And so a really simple one that I give most of my clients and my students is like, it's just a bit of a 4-step process. And because here's the thing, it's all energy, it's all in the body, it all wants to move. So when we're feeling like anything that takes us out of embodied leadership has an activation within our body. And that's what we need to understand, because you know, our body keeps a score. Our body literally tells us everything that we need as powerful information, because it is a transmitter, it is available. And so when you're feeling something, rather than being in your head about it, the first step is just like, what is it? Where is it? Right? So what is it and where is it, like in the body? And when you've found where it is, it's like, how does it want to move? Right? So it might be like, okay, might be in a meeting right now and I'm activated. So it might be, okay, I'm just going to breathe this out. I'm going to breathe into the actual spot. And a way to bypass the brain and drop into the body is mouth to mouth breath. So it might be going, and you can do that sitting in a meeting. Like anyone who says you can't do this work, you can do this live in time. Or it might be, I'm just going to flick it out through my fingers. Right. But if you're at home, it might go, okay, I want to move, I want to dance, I want to shake it out, I want to do whatever it wants to do. I might want to sing, I might want to scream, give it voice, whatever it may be. I know for me, if it sits in my throat, I'll often want to go, or something, you know, just to let it move. So it's then how does it want to move? H. And then I move into attunement. So if I'm by myself, I take a moment to activate all 5 senses. Okay, just attune to the room. What's here? Ground back in, right? Like, what can I feel? What can I smell? What can I see? You know, just really attune. If you're in the room with other people, make eye contact with other people. Just let yourself attune to the other people that are in the room, right? And then you want to come from the mature adult. So in this moment, what would the mature adult choose? Because the activation is often the part of you that was probably younger that didn't have what you needed. So you chose that way of being, right? Like most leadership pieces and qualities that are not powerful are often the inner child running and sitting in the CEO seat. And so when I say that, it's like, okay, now how do I come from the mature adult and choose from that place? Because once you've moved the energy, you can be able to see what's going on. Yeah. So that's the process that I would take someone through on a basic level. Other ones simply can be taking a moment out just to meditate, like, and just be with yourself. If you don't have time to meditate, do a dump list, like get it out of your brain. I will never forget, and I use this as such an example. I used it last night I was in another guest speaking gig years ago when I was like first starting my coaching business, and I was all flustered. You're like, we're in this mastermind, there's me and 8 other women, and I'm like talking about all my problems. And you're like, go home and meditate. And I was like, who is this woman telling me to meditate? I know how to meditate. I was so angry. However, after like 3 days of just meditating, I birthed this whole thing that just wanted to come through me. And then we were able to like put it together and build that out. But it took me just going, okay, she's told me this for a reason. What am I actually not like in resistance to, you know?
Absolutely. I still remember it myself. I remember the actual day. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, I've had feedback from coaches like that as well. And quite often when we're A-type and achievers, it is the last thing we want to hear. And it's that old analogy of, you know, if you've got 20 minutes, meditate. If you haven't got any time, meditate for an hour. You know, like it's that whole thing of our rushing woman syndrome and our achiever focus, right?
Yeah, I'm really big now. If I've got an hour to do something, I will spend at least 10 minutes of that meditating now, just to get my head clear. Because like, and I have a construct that I use for a CEO day, and I'll share this with you now because I feel like it's super important. So the first, like, it's pretty much a CEO day is 3 steps. Like when you want to trying to create something or trying to be with something where you need that like visionary thinking, you know. So the first step is creative time. And so that could look like meditation. It could look like, you know, once you've done that, then mind mapping, just getting ideas out and just playing, like being in the energy of play with creation. And that could be an hour, that could be 2 hours, that could be 3 hours, however long that takes for you. And then once you've played with that, you move into the planning phase. It's like, okay, cool. How do I bring this together in a way that's actually powerful enough for, you know, people to receive it and to be able to dissect it and digest it in a way that feels good? And then you move into the mundane. So that's like doing all the boring bits that pull it all together. So it might be like the copy for something, or, you know, just the mundane stuff. And so even just applying that strategy to how I work with most things, it has like shifted the game massively and allowed me to stay like in my leadership when I'm in creation mode.
Absolutely. I love that. And it reflects very much how I run team building planning sessions here at the boardroom in the bush. And I had a medical research team who were all neurologists last week and neuroscientists. And so exactly, really in their brain, very much in that 400 frequency level, want to dissect and intellectualize everything. And the first thing I had them do after doing an acknowledgement of country and we did a cleansing was take them for a bushwalk. And they had you know, some sheets they had to fill in, which were around sensory. What can I see, feel, hear? And then what am I inspired by here? And a couple of them were very like, why are we doing this? And by the time they all came back, they all had all of these ideas that they were like, gosh, I haven't felt this creative in ages. You know, like nature is such a great inspiration in that way, but also creating space for them to sit quietly for half an hour on their own and just immerse. So that creative time that you're talking about and play is so important to then be able to create from and to have that openness to create.
Yeah, I totally.
Going back to your little kind of process around helping people recalibrate in a meeting or whatever, I think that's super helpful. And I love a great mindfulness practitioner, Charlotta, who I know you know as well, would often talk about the immature and the mature and really sitting with and feeling, what is this coming up for me? And maybe it's jealousy, maybe it's, you know, resentment of something. And so then that's sitting with and going, okay, what does immature resentment say? And that's where you get to go, I don't like that. You know? And then going, okay, then can I be neutral around it and just observe what is, You know, what is, okay, well, this has happened, that's the reality, they're the facts. And then go, right, what's mature resentment? And listening into that. And often people will push it away and say, well, I'm not being a good person if I've still got a level of that. But it is going, what's mature resentment telling me, or whatever it might be. And often there are hints in there of, well, what else haven't I worked on yet? Where have I still got some shame or anger or hurt or something coming up?
And sorry to cut you off, but I often find that resentment is often an unmet desire. And it's often one that's not been spoken into, it's not been shared, and there may be shame around the desire that most people have. So they don't know how to speak into it, they don't know how to bring it forward. And so we create all these unconscious expectations and it like things from other people, and then it breeds, that resentment. And I think it's really important, like even inside relationship, a lot of people do that. It's like we have this idea of how it should look, whether it be in the boardroom, whether it be in the bedroom, whether it be wherever it may be. The ideology of what we think we should be doing is what often creates, I think, the resentment for most people.
The society and all of its things that it puts out. And I agree. I had a client only last week who was stuck in a bit of, look at my copy, look at my stuff that I'm putting out in the world. Mine's almost identical to this other person, and yet they're skyrocketing. And there was a bit of that jealousy and also a bit of shame around, why isn't mine taken off? And when we really unpacked, and when I sat with where they were at, it was super clear, because that person is in a much cleaner, higher energy. And so even though it's the exact same words, people can feel the energy behind what you're saying, and whether it's truly authentic or just clever copy. And so that other person was radiating this level of love and vibration, whereas this person I was working with were in a bit of a fear state. They'd been through some challenges. And so even though the words were saying this, it had a taste of fear and, I need you to buy my stuff now. And we've all been through that. We've all been through where we've done a quick grab for cash or whatever it might be because of our state. And so I love that your CEO day has the creative time and play first. And I would say it's about stripping away all that stuff. So when we create from purity and not from a lack or a fear or a judgment or something like that, like actually taking time to address those things and settle them. So when we create from our higher self and our mature self.
100%. And I think too, like most of us don't realize when we're creating from scarcity, but like if there's any part of you that's like, I need to do this, like just know that you're in that, like and for me, like that's been one of my biggest things. It's like I know energetically whatever I'm operating from, I'm going to compound, I'm going to create more of that. So the cleaner I get myself, like whether it be if I'm feeling lethargic in my body and I haven't exercised, it's like, I'm going to create more of not feeling good because I'm thinking and I'm identifying with not feeling good. It's like, okay, cool. What can I do right now in this moment to move this energy? Okay, I need to go for a walk, or I need to go to the gym, or I need to move my body in some way, right? And the minute that we move that, we start to open up. We start to become more available. And one of my mentors once said, the best ability is availability. And I think that for me really hit home. It's like every time I feel I'm like not available or something's not coming in like that I desire, or I've sat there and I'm like, I'm doing this and I'm going for this. It's like, oh, hold on. Am I available for this right now?
I love that. And it just reminds me, last week I was traveling a lot for work, interstate and all around. And I was a bit like, end of the year, gosh, do I want to do all this travel? And then I was like, no, it's an opportunity. I can be in planes and in the car, and this is my library. I love listening and learning. So I'm going to download some books and get into like, I've got some space to do this stuff on my way. And so I was in a really high vibe space by the time I arrived at all my hotels and where I went. And twice, not just once, but I ended up having twice my meals paid for. So once the hotel staff gifted me my dinner because they just had great interaction with me. And then the next night I was at a hotel in Queensland and I was sitting and I was really enjoying myself, and I was reading some notes and listening to an audiobook, and I was savoring the food. I had this beautiful sweet potato encrusted in maple syrup and stuff. It was beautiful. And I was really enjoying it. And when I got up to pay, they said that elderly couple over there said they loved watching you enjoy your meal so much that they've paid for it. And I just went, see, when you're in that, like you're saying, availability, magic happens. And yeah, and that is available to all of us all of the time, if only we get out of our own head and our own way and you know, just be in place and space. Yeah, so I love all of this that we've shared, and I guess in order to wrap up, if you had any words of wisdom or a thought that I mean, it's a huge topic, but for those who are listening that are going, I've had glimpses of embodied leadership and I, you know, a taste of it. How do I get there and maintain it? I'd love any tips or advice you have for people for, you know, continuing to evolve that way.
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is stop trying to get there. That would be the first thing I'd say, and just really land in like, how can I be present in this moment? If I were truly, and I'm going to quote you in this, AJ, if I were truly listening, what would love do in this moment? And come from that place, because, you know, even just to use what I've experienced this week, my stepmom's at the hospital, she's screaming and she's yelling and she's like in her fear state. Nothing's getting done. The minute I talk from love and from a place of like, I get that you guys are in this right now. However, this is what needs to happen. And I come from a clear intention of how do I make this move for everyone when no one feels less than. That's when things started moving. And so it's just like, it's looking at it from a wider scope and a wider lens of like, what is really necessary for the highest intention of all right now. And I think that's where you get to clean it up. It's not like, you know, we always talk about me first, and yes, you are first when it comes to powerful leadership. However, if you takes away from others, you're not looking at the law of oneness. And so it's like me is you. So I get to work with all of this and how this interplays